My wife begged me to have kids, but as soon as they were born, she abandoned us. Now she's a substance addict and wants to make a comeback. Emma and I have been together since high school. She was literally my dream girl and made me feel like a little kid again. Because of her, I was motivated to study and be at the top of my studies because I wanted nothing more than to provide for her. But she had other plans. She waited until we were moved in together and I had settled down at my job to tell me she actually did want kids. I told her I would think about it, and as the weeks passed, she never brought it up again. Honestly, I was kind of hoping she changed her mind or something, but then she started raving about her friends' baby showers. She started accidentally leaving baby catalogs around the house and pointing out how cute every child we passed by was. Eventually, my time had come where I couldn't avoid it anymore. I sat Emma down on the couch and told her, I am ready to have kids. She gave me a big toothy smile, something she only does when she's really happy, and butterflies filled my stomach. We made love right there and then. No rubber. For the next few weeks, we were riding like rabbits. It felt like we were in high school again, and lo and behold, we finally got the news. The 2 pink lines. Life became bright after that. Well, mainly for me, because after the novelty wore off, it seemed like Emma was just going along with it. One morning, I found myself convincing Emma to get in the car so we wouldn't miss the ultrasound appointment, which was completely bizarre considering how she was the one who introduced the idea of babies. And that same day, we were hit with the news that changed everything. The sonographer told us it wasn't just a baby anymore, it was twins. A smile plastered on my face, and I practically hit the ceiling with excitement. But as I turned to Emma, she had a look of disappointment. She even sighed and asked the sonographer if she could check again. It wasn't anything too negative, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in my mind. When we got home, I started going through finances, and we had more than enough to support both of our daughters. I immediately exchanged all the baby gear for doubles, and when I asked my wife what color she wanted the double baby stroller to be, she just said, I don't care, before going back to watching TV. An awful gut feeling washed over me, but then I thought about all the pregnancy books I had read and how much women's hormones change, so I brushed it off and decided to instead be more supportive by cooking more homemade meals and giving more foot massages. But as her bump developed, the more our relationship turned cold, like ice cold. She stopped wanting anything to do with me. Whenever we were in bed at night, and I so much as had a toe touching her body, she would immediately pull away and move further to her side of the bed. Whenever I tried to hold her hand, in public and private, her face would be permanently contorted until I let go. I had no idea what I was doing wrong, and I honestly started to believe I was a terrible husband. And after I caught her watching a romance movie alone on a Friday night, something we've always done together since the day we met, I took action. I finally called her friend, Stacy. I didn't even have anything planned to say, and by the time she picked up, I was already in tears, but she immediately went into comforting mode. It was like she was expecting it. It took a few minutes for me to calm down, and when I did, Stacy reminded me that she was Emma's friend, not mine, and that's where her loyalties lie. But before hanging up, she said something that changed how I would view Emma forever. You know the phrase, fail to prepare, prepare to fail? If I was you, I would prepare for anything that could happen in that hospital room. My heart dropped, and that's when I heard Emma scream. Her water broke. I called an ambulance, and I soon found out exactly what Stacy was talking about. The ambulance arrived within minutes, the flashing lights bathing our apartment in an eerie red glow as the paramedics rushed in with practiced efficiency. They assessed Emma quickly while I grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. Multiple pregnancy, 36 weeks, water broken, one paramedic reported into his radio while they carefully helped Emma onto the stretcher. Her face was contorted in pain, but when our eyes met briefly, I caught something else, hesitation, maybe even fear that had nothing to do with the impending birth. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and my own racing thoughts, Stacy's warning echoing in my mind as Emma squeezed my hand during contractions that seemed to be coming faster and more intensely than I'd expected. We arrived at the hospital in record time, and Emma was immediately wheeled into a delivery room while I was instructed to change into scrubs. The delivery room was a flurry of activity, nurses connecting Emma to monitors while the doctor checked her dilation. 8 centimeters already, she announced with raised eyebrows. These babies are in a hurry to meet their daddy. I positioned myself at Emma's side, offering words of encouragement that felt hollow even to my own ears. Between contractions, I noticed Emma exchanging glances with her primary nurse, a tall woman with copper hair who seemed to know exactly what Emma needed without being asked. Did you get a chance to discuss your birth plan with your husband? The nurse asked, her tone oddly cautious. Emma shook her head slightly, grimacing as another contraction hit, and I felt that same icy dread from Stacy's warning settle deeper into my stomach. The next few hours passed in a marathon of contractions, medical jargon, and mounting tension as Emma progressed rapidly through labor. I see a head, the doctor finally announced, and despite my growing suspicions, my heart soared with anticipation. Our first daughter entered the world with a powerful cry that echoed through the delivery room, her tiny body slick and perfect as the doctor placed her on Emma's chest. I expected to see that toothy smile I loved so much, but Emma merely glanced at our daughter before looking anxiously at the nurse. Time to push again, Emma, the doctor instructed, and within minutes, our second daughter arrived, smaller than her sister, but with an equally healthy set of lungs. The nurses whisked the babies away to be cleaned and checked while the doctor attended to Emma, and I followed our daughters, counting fingers and toes through tears of joy. When I returned to Emma's side, clutching photos of our perfect girls on my phone, I found her in hushed conversation with the copper-haired nurse. They fell silent when I approached, and the nurse quickly excused herself, promising to bring the babies back soon. "They're perfect, Em," I gushed, showing her the photos, but her smile was forced, her eyes not meeting mine. "I need to rest," she said flatly, turning away from both me and the pictures of our daughters. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early, having spent the night at home getting the nursery ready for 2 instead of 1. The copper-haired nurse, Piper, according to her badge, met me in the hallway with a peculiar expression. "Your wife asked for some privacy this morning," she said carefully, "but your daughters are in the nursery and could use some daddy time." I spent the morning holding my girls, learning to tell them apart, Lily with the birthmark on her shoulder, Rose with the stronger grip, and fielding congratulatory calls from family and friends. Emma remained resting, according to the staff, though I was beginning to suspect there was more to it. By afternoon, I was finally allowed into Emma's room, where she sat propped up in bed, staring vacantly out the window. "The girls are beautiful," I offered, settling into the chair beside her bed. Emma turned to me with red-rimmed eyes and spoke the words that confirmed my worst fears. "I can't do this, Jake. I never wanted twins. I never really wanted any of this." The confession hung heavy in the room as Emma explained through tears that she'd only agreed to having children because she thought she might lose me otherwise, but the reality of twins had pushed her beyond what she was willing to sacrifice. "What are you saying, Emma?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the packed overnight bag on her bed and the absence of the hospital bracelet on her wrist. "I've signed the discharge papers. My sister Tina is picking me up in an hour," she said, her voice steadier now, rehearsed even. "There's a letter for you at home explaining everything. The girls will be better off with just you." I sat frozen as Emma continued, explaining that she'd been planning this for weeks, how Piper was actually an old college friend who'd helped arrange for her early discharge, how she'd already cleared out her personal items from our home while I was at work last week. My protests, pleas, and eventual anger fell on determined ears. Emma had made up her mind long before the girls were even born. When Tina arrived, looking uncomfortable but resolved, Emma didn't even say goodbye to our day-old daughters before walking out of the hospital and, as I would later discover, out of our lives completely. The next few days passed in a surreal haze of paperwork, nurse instructions, and the dawning reality that I was now a single father to newborn twins. The hospital staff were incredibly supportive, especially once they understood my situation, with Piper in particular seeming to overcompensate with kindness, perhaps out of guilt for her role in Emma's plan. We were discharged 5 days after the girls were born, and I drove home with agonizing caution, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see my daughters securely fastened in their car seats. Entering our apartment alone with 2 infant carriers was the moment the full weight of my new reality crashed down on me. Emma's letter was on the kitchen counter, just as she'd said, a 5-page handwritten explanation of how she'd never wanted motherhood, how the discovery of twins had been her breaking point, and how she believed the girls would be better with me than with a mother who resented their existence. She ended by asking me not to try finding her and promising that her lawyer would be in touch about formal custody arrangements. I read the letter 3 times before the crying of one of the twins. Rose, I thought, recognizing the particular pitch of her wail, pulled me back to the immediate needs at hand. Those first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and bottle feedings carefully timed to give each girl equal attention. My boss, Adrian, turned out to be unexpectedly understanding, arranging for me to work remotely for the first 3 months and connecting me with another employee, Nevada, who'd recently returned from maternity leave and became an invaluable source of advice. My parents drove up from Florida to stay for a month, my mother teaching me how to bathe squirming infants, and my father quietly handling grocery runs and cooking so I could focus on the girls. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years showed up with casseroles and offers to help, creating a support network that kept me afloat when I felt like drowning. Emma's absence was a wound that seemed to reopen every time someone innocently asked about the girl's mother, but I soon crafted a brief, dignified response that acknowledged the situation without inviting pity. Their mother decided parenting wasn't for her, so it's just us 3 now. The formal custody paperwork arrived as promised, with Emma relinquishing all parental rights and responsibilities, asking only that I not seek child support from her in return. My lawyer advised against agreeing to this, but I signed anyway, wanting to close this chapter cleanly, rather than maintaining any connection that might give Emma reason to disrupt our lives again. The twins grew quickly, developing distinct personalities despite their identical genetic makeup. Lily, more observant and cautious, Rose, more adventurous and vocal. I documented everything, creating separate photo albums and journals for each girl, determined that they would never question how wanted and loved they were, despite their mother's absence. By their first birthday, we had established our own little family unit, complete with routines and traditions that felt natural and right. The girls took their first steps within days of each other, both reaching for me with identical expressions of determination. I captured these moments on video, sometimes feeling a pang of sadness that Emma was missing these milestones, but more often feeling grateful that my daughters would never remember a a time when they were unwanted by one of their parents. Life settled into a new normal, with work-from-home days, playgroups, and the occasional date that never seemed to develop into anything serious, partly because of my busy schedule, but mostly because I was still processing the betrayal that had blindsided me. The twins' second birthday came and went, marked by a small party at our apartment with the close friends who'd become our extended family. Drew from next door, who frequently babysat when I needed to attend in-person meetings, brought handmade wooden toys for each girl. KT, my college roommate who'd become a regular visitor, arrived with personalized storybooks featuring the girls as the main characters. It was during this party that Lily first asked about her mommy, having noticed that her friend Tucker from playgroup had both a mommy and daddy. I'd been preparing for this question, of course, but the reality of explaining to a 2-year-old why her mother had left was still gut-wrenching. I settled for a simplified version of the truth, explaining that some people aren't ready to be parents, but that didn't mean the girls weren't perfect and loved exactly as they were. The question came up more frequently after that, especially as the girls started preschool and encountered more traditional family structures. I consulted a child psychologist, Azariah, who helped me navigate these conversations in age-appropriate ways, emphasizing that families come in all shapes and sizes. We created a family book with pictures of everyone who loved the girls, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and close friends, focusing on the abundance of love in their lives rather than the one person who was missing. Just past the girls' third birthday, as we were settling into our weekend pancake breakfast routine, a knock at the door disrupted our carefully constructed peace. I opened it to find Emma standing in our hallway, almost unrecognizable from the woman who had walked out of the hospital 3 years earlier. Her once healthy frame was gaunt, her clothes hanging loosely from her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her bloodshot eyes. "I need to see my daughters," she slurred, the smell of alcohol heavy on her breath despite the early hour. I instinctively closed the door partway, blocking her view into the apartment where the girls were happily smearing syrup onto their pancakes. "You gave up that right 3 years ago," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. Emma's face contorted with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I'm their mother," she hissed, trying to push past me into the apartment. "I have rights." The legal papers flashed in my mind, the ones where she had explicitly relinquished those very rights. But I knew this wasn't the time for that discussion. "You're clearly not in a state to see them right now," I said firmly. "If you want to discuss this, get sober and contact my lawyer." Emma's desperate demeanor suddenly shifted, and she broke down in tears, explaining between sobs how she'd lost her job, her apartment, and how her sister had finally kicked her out after months of enabling her growing substance abuse. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, "and I remembered how good you always were with money." The truth became clear. This wasn't about reconnecting with our daughters. It was about finding financial support now that she'd exhausted all other options. I gave her my lawyer's contact information and firmly closed the door, then spent the rest of breakfast distracting the girls while my mind raced with contingency plans. Emma's sudden reappearance triggered a flurry of legal consultations and security measures. I installed new locks and a security system, updated the girls' emergency contact information at preschool, and prepared their teachers for the possibility that their estranged mother might attempt contact. My lawyer assured me that Emma's rights had been legally terminated and that any visitation would need to go through proper channels, including court-mandated sobriety tests and supervised visits. For weeks, I jumped at every unexpected knock, scrutinized unfamiliar cars in our neighborhood, and volunteered for every possible preschool activity to ensure I was present whenever the girls were in public. The anticipated legal battle never materialized, however, as Emma apparently lacked the resources or sobriety to pursue it. Instead, she took to leaving tearful, often incoherent voicemails on my phone, alternating between begging to see the girls and accusing me of stealing her children. Each message revealed more clearly how unfit she was to be in the twins' lives, reinforcing my determination to protect them from the chaos she would bring. The girls, meanwhile, remained mercifully unaware of the turmoil, continuing to thrive in the stable environment I'd worked so hard to create. Lily's artistic talents began to emerge, her preschool artwork showing surprising detail and composition for a 3-year-old. Rose revealed a gift for memorization, reciting entire storybooks verbatim and correcting me if I tried to skip pages at bedtime. These developments became my focus, channeling my energy into nurturing their individual strengths rather than dwelling on the shadows Emma had cast over our lives. 6 months after Emma's appearance at our door, I received a call from Tina, who explained that Emma had been admitted to a rehabilitation facility after being found unconscious in a motel room. The doctors had discovered her deteriorating liver function and given her an ultimatum: get clean or face potentially fatal consequences. Tina asked if I would consider allowing Emma some form of contact with the girls once she completed her 90-day program, suggesting that becoming part of their lives again might give Emma the motivation to stay sober. I listened politely, but remained firm in my position. The girls' well-being came first, and introducing an unstable presence into their lives, even if that presence was their biological mother, would not serve their best interests. Any relationship would need to be built slowly, with professional supervision, and only after Emma had demonstrated long-term sobriety and stability. Tina seemed to understand, promising to keep me updated on Emma's progress without pushing further. Life continued its forward momentum, with preschool graduations, summer vacations to my parents' Florida home, and the girls' ever-expanding vocabularies and personalities. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious developed until I met Poe, a children's librarian who ran the Saturday story hour the girls adored. Our relationship evolved naturally, beginning with casual conversations during story hour, progressing to coffee while the girls played in the library's kid zone, and eventually to dinner dates when Drew or my parents were available to babysit. Poe approached my situation with understanding and patience, never pushing to replace Emma, but offering a genuine connection with both me and the girls. The twins took to her immediately, especially Rose, who shared Poe's love of books and stories. After 8 months of dating, I cautiously introduced the concept of Poe spending more time at our home, carefully observing the girls' reactions. They were enthusiastic, particularly about Poe's pancake-making skills, superior to mine, and her willingness to read just one more story at bedtime. Our relationship deepened, and I found myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible, letting go of the anger and betrayal that had lingered even as I'd built our new life. On the twins' 4th birthday, as we celebrated with a small party at the local park, I noticed a familiar figure watching from a distance. Emma, looking healthier than when I'd last seen her but still bearing the marks of her struggles, stood beside a park bench, clutching what appeared to be wrapped presents. Our eyes met briefly before she turned and walked away, leaving the gifts on the bench. I retrieved them later, finding age-appropriate books for each girl with simple inscriptions, "With love, from your mother." I decided to keep the gifts hidden until I could consult with Azariah about the best approach. The psychologist advised that, at 4, the girls were still too young to process the complexity of their mother's absence and return, suggesting that any contact should be carefully structured and supervised by professionals if I decided to allow it at all. Following this guidance, I contacted Emma through Tina, proposing a meeting with just the adults present to discuss potential next steps. The meeting was tense, but productive. Emma was 6 months sober, attending regular therapy, and had secured stable housing and part-time work. She acknowledged that she had no legal right to demand access to the girls, but expressed genuine remorse for her actions and a desire to know them in whatever capacity I deemed appropriate. We agreed on a slow, carefully monitored process. First, letters and cards that I would review before sharing. Then, if all went well, brief supervised visits that would be presented to the girls as meetings with a family friend until they were old enough to understand more. This arrangement proceeded cautiously for several months, with Emma sending thoughtful, age-appropriate notes and small gifts that showed she was making an effort to understand who the girls were becoming. Our first supervised visit took place at Azariah's office, a neutral space where the psychologist could observe and intervene if necessary. I introduced Emma simply as someone who knew you when you were babies, and the girls responded with the friendly curiosity they showed to most adults. The visit lasted only 30 minutes, but went smoothly, with Emma following the guidelines we'd established about not revealing her identity and focusing on getting to know the girls rather than seeking affection or making promises. As we established this cautious new dynamic, my relationship with Poe continued to deepen. She moved into our apartment shortly after the twins turned 5, bringing her extensive book collection and calm presence into our daily lives. The girls adapted to the change with surprising ease, seeming to intuitively understand that Poe's presence added to, rather than diminished, the attention and love they received. Our family expanded again when Poe's elderly golden retriever, Tucker, joined our household, quickly becoming the girls' favorite napping companion and confidant. Emma maintained her sobriety and continued the structured contact we'd established, gradually earning limited trust through her consistency and respect for boundaries. When the girls turned 6, with Azariah's guidance, we began the process of explaining Emma's identity, starting with simple concepts about different kinds of families and the various ways people can be connected. The girls processed this information in their own ways, Lily with thoughtful questions, Rose with emotional declarations about how lucky she was to have so many people who cared about her. The day Emma officially became your birth mother, rather than Ms. Emma in our conversations, was both terrifying and liberating. I watched carefully for signs of confusion or distress, ready to scale back if either girl seemed overwhelmed, but they absorbed this new reality with the resilience children often show when difficult truths are presented honestly and lovingly. Emma's role remained peripheral: monthly supervised visits, occasional attendance at school events, seated separately from our family, and cards on birthdays and holidays. She never pushed for more than I was comfortable giving, seeming to understand that her place in the girls' lives was a privilege she had to earn rather than a right she could demand. As the girls approached their 7th birthday, Poe and I began discussing marriage, wanting to formalize the family unit we'd created together. I proposed during a weekend trip to the beach, with the twins serving as enthusiastic accomplices, holding hand-painted signs asking, "Will you be our forever Poe Rent?" a pun the girls found hilarious. The wedding was small and joyful, held in the community garden where we'd had our 3rd date. The girls served as flower girls, scattering petals with such enthusiasm that the aisle was barely visible beneath the colorful carpet they created. Emma attended as a guest, maintaining a respectful distance and leaving early after offering genuine congratulations. My wedding to Poe marked the final healing healing of the wound Emma's departure had left. We were complete, not despite our complicated history, but because of how that history had shaped us into the family we had become. The twins continued to thrive, excelling in school and developing their individual passions, Lily in art and science, Rose in literature and music. They understood their family story in an age-appropriate way, neither idealizing the absent mother nor harboring resentment toward her. Emma remained a peripheral but consistent presence, sober and stable, gradually building a relationship with her daughters that was appropriate to her role in their lives, and I found myself exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by love that had been hard-won, but was all the more precious for the journey it took to find it. I sometimes think back to those early days with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. The girls turned 8, then 9, then suddenly they were hitting double digits. Their personalities blossomed in ways that constantly surprised me. Alice developed a knack for mathematics that left me scratching my head over homework I couldn't comprehend. Rose composed melodies on the second-hand piano we'd squeezed into the living room. Our little house gradually transformed with their growing interests. Posters replaced alphabet charts. Bookshelves sagged under the weight of novels instead of picture books. I coached Alice's math team on Tuesdays. I sat through Rose's piano recitals on weekends. We established routines that anchored our lives, and Sunday pancakes became sacred ritual. Movie nights featured increasingly sophisticated films, and Emma maintained her presence through monthly visits. She never missed a birthday, and she attended school performances when invited. The girls accepted her limitations without drama. They understood the difference between a mother and a mom. I became the latter through daily acts of care, brushing tangled hair before school and kissing scraped knees, explaining periods with awkward diagrams, and my mother proved invaluable during these transitions. She stepped in whenever I felt overwhelmed, and her wisdom guided me through choppy waters. My father taught the girls to fish at the lake house. They both caught their first bass on the same summer afternoon. We celebrated with a ridiculous fish-shaped cake. Work remained demanding but fulfilling. I earned a promotion that eased our financial pressures. The girls needed braces, but Alice required tutoring for French. Rose wanted more advanced piano lessons, but somehow we made it all work. The budget stretched like magic, and I learned to comparison shop with fervor. We found joy in simple pleasures, and hiking local trails became our weekend adventure. The girls collected interesting rocks and feathers, and our kitchen windowsill displayed their natural treasures. I dated occasionally during those middle years, and nothing serious materialized for quite some time. The girls met only 2 of these brief companions. I protected them from emotional attachments that might dissolve. They had experienced enough disruption already. Then Mark entered our lives through Alice's science club. He volunteered as a mentor for the robotics team. His patient explanations impressed me immediately, and we exchanged numbers for purely practical reasons. Coffee meetings to discuss the upcoming competition turned personal. He shared stories of his own childhood in rural Vermont. I admitted my fears about raising daughters alone. He listened without offering unsolicited advice. The girls noticed my interest before I acknowledged it myself. "He looks at you funny," Alice observed after a tournament. Rose simply started including him in her drawings of our family. We moved cautiously into romance, and Mark understood the delicate balance required. He brought books instead of flowers, and he suggested outings that included the girls. He never tried to replace their absent father figures. The girls warmed to him gradually, then completely. Our first vacation together tested all our boundaries. A week at the beach revealed everyone's quirks and habits. Mark couldn't function without morning coffee, and Alice needed time alone each day. Rose insisted on burying everyone in sand, and we returned home more connected than before. Mark proposed on a random Tuesday evening, and no fancy restaurant or elaborate speech. He simply placed a small box beside my dinner plate. The girls knew about his plans, and their excited faces gave everything away. We married the following spring in my parents' backyard. Alice and Rose served as my only attendants. They wore dresses they actually liked. We honeymooned locally while my parents spoiled the girls. Blending our lives happened naturally afterward, and Mark moved into our modest house. He converted the garage into a workroom for projects with the girls. His book collection merged with ours on straining shelves. Emma expressed genuine happiness about our marriage, and her own life had stabilized considerably. She had maintained her sobriety for nearly 5 years. She had secured a job at a local nursery. Plants responded to her careful attention, and her apartment stayed neat and welcoming. The girls occasionally spent weekends there now. They returned with potted herbs and painted stones. Middle school introduced new challenges for both girls. Alice struggled with social dynamics, and Rose battled performance anxiety. I attended countless parent-teacher conferences, and Mark researched strategies for helping them cope. We surrounded them with appropriate support systems, and therapists, coaches, and extended family members. The girls developed resilience through these difficulties, and they learned to advocate for themselves. They discovered strengths they hadn't recognized before. Our family expanded unexpectedly when Mark's mother became ill. She moved into our already crowded home. The girls immediately adopted her as another grandmother. They absorbed her stories of Mark's embarrassing childhood moments. They learned to cook traditional family recipes. Her presence enriched our lives for 8 precious months. We mourned her passing as a united family. The girls experienced grief in profoundly different ways. Alice became methodical about preserving memories. Rose composed a haunting melody that made us all all weep. I watched them process this loss with mature hearts. They understood the permanence of death now, and they appreciated life's fragility more keenly. High school arrived with shocking suddenness. The girls diverged in their interests and friend groups. Alice pursued science competitions with fierce dedication, and Rose joined theater productions and music ensembles. Their schedules became logistical nightmares, and someone always needed a ride somewhere. Mark and I tag-teamed the endless commitments, and we still maintained family dinners most nights. College discussions began earlier than expected, and campus visits filled our vacation time. Application essays consumed countless evenings. I found myself calculating tuition costs in my sleep. The girl's father resurfaced during their junior year. A Facebook message appeared without warning, and he expressed interest in reconnecting. The girls approached this development with cautious curiosity. I supported their decision to meet him, and Mark offered to accompany them for security. They declined both our offers. They met him at a public restaurant instead. They returned with complicated expressions. "He seems nice enough," Alice reported with characteristic reserve. Rose simply shrugged and returned to her music. They maintained occasional contact afterward, and nothing deep developed from these interactions. They understood his limitations better now. Emma continued her steady presence through these years. She never overstepped or made promises she couldn't keep. She attended graduations and special performances. She sent thoughtful birthday cards with modest gifts. The girls appreciated her consistent effort, and they developed compassion for her struggles. Acceptance replaced any lingering resentment, and college acceptance letters arrived in a flurry. Alice received a scholarship to study biochemistry. Rose earned admission to a prestigious music program. Pride mingled with impending grief in our household. I prepared for their departure with practical efforts. Shopping for dorm supplies occupied countless weekends. Conversations about safety and independence filled our drives. Mark created special toolkits for each of them. Their high school graduation passed in a blur. Family gathered from several states. Emma sat with us in the family section. The girl's father attended with his new wife. Everyone behaved with remarkable civility, and the summer before college tested everyone's emotions. The girls alternated between clingy and distant, and Mark organized special outings with each daughter. I found myself randomly weeping while folding laundry. We survived the emotional roller coaster together, and move-in days arrived with military precision. We loaded 2 separate vehicles, and we traveled to 2 different campuses. I maintained composure until the final goodbyes, and then I sobbed uncontrollably in parking lots. Mark drove us home to our suddenly quiet house. The adjustment to empty nesting surprised us both. The house echoed with absence, and meals seemed pointless without the girls. We wandered rooms, touching abandoned possessions, and gradually we established new patterns. We rediscovered each other without parental identities, and we traveled to places without kid-friendly attractions. We stayed up late discussing books and films. The girls called with varying frequency, and Alice checked in with scheduled precision. Rose called randomly during walks between classes, and both thrived in their respective environments. They made friends, and they joined clubs. They navigated academic challenges, and they handled disappointments with growing maturity. Holiday breaks brought them home temporarily, and they returned with new vocabularies and opinions. They eyed their childhood rooms with amused detachment. They slept until noon and stayed out late. They brought home interesting friends occasionally, and our family expanded through these new connections. Then the pandemic hit during their sophomore year. Everything changed overnight, and classes moved online. Campuses emptied. The girls returned home with hastily packed belongings. Our house filled again with youthful energy, and we established home workspaces for everyone. Kitchen tables became desks, and bedrooms transformed into Zoom studios. We navigated internet bandwidth issues daily. I rediscovered the joy of having everyone under one roof. The girls processed their disappointments gradually, and lost performances, canceled research opportunities, and disrupted friendships. They showed remarkable adaptability, and they developed new skills during lockdown. Alice learned coding between classes, and Rose recorded multi-layered compositions in her bedroom. Mark taught them basic car maintenance in the driveway. I introduced them to family recipes they'd previously ignored. Emma struggled during the isolation, and her recovery community moved online. She missed the physical presence of supporters, and the girls helped her navigate technology challenges. They dropped off care packages at safe distances. They demonstrated remarkable compassion during this time, and eventually campuses reopened with restrictions. The girls returned to modified college experiences, and they appreciated their education with renewed perspective. They valued in-person interactions more deeply. They called home more frequently than before. I felt our bonds had strengthened through shared adversity. Graduation approached with surprising speed for both girls. Alice secured admission to a prestigious graduate program. Rose received several performance opportunities through connections. Mark and I beamed with pride at their accomplishments. Emma maintained her consistent presence in their lives. She had reached 10 years of sobriety, and she had developed meaningful friendships and hobbies. She had found contentment within her limitations, and the graduation ceremonies fell on consecutive weekends. We traveled between states with extended family, and we celebrated their achievements with appropriate fanfare. I watched my daughters accept their diplomas with steady hands. They had become remarkable young women, and they had overcome significant early challenges. They had built lives filled with purpose and connection. They had surpassed surpassed every expectation I'd ever held. Their next chapters began with exciting momentum. Alice moved across the country for her research position. Rose traveled abroad with a musical ensemble, and Mark and I helped with both transitions. We shipped forgotten items, and we provided emergency funds. We listened to homesick phone calls, and our home transformed yet again. We converted bedrooms to new purposes, and we donated outgrown possessions. We preserved special mementos in organized containers, and we adapted to this new phase gradually. The girls established their adult lives independently. They navigated romantic relationships with greater wisdom than I had. They managed financial challenges with reasonable prudence, and they pursued their passions with dedicated effort. They returned home with decreasing frequency, and holiday gatherings became precious reunions. We treasured each visit without demanding more, and we supported their growing independence. Emma developed health problems requiring intervention. The girls rallied around her with practical support. They researched treatment options, and they accompanied her to appointments. They demonstrated the depth of their forgiveness, and I witnessed their compassion with profound gratitude. My own parents aged during these years, and my father's memory began slipping noticeably. My mother shouldered increasing caregiving responsibilities, and the girls visited them whenever possible. They recorded family stories before they disappeared, and they honored these connections with sincere attention. Mark and I began contemplating retirement options, and we researched locations closer to the girls. We calculated financial requirements, and we imagined new adventures together. I reflected often on our family's journey. The terrified young woman facing single parenthood had vanished. The desperate mother juggling impossible demands had evolved. The uncertain guardian doubting her abilities had transformed. I had become someone I never imagined possible. The girls occasionally referenced their unconventional upbringing. "You showed us resilience," Alice noted during a holiday gathering. "You taught us love takes many forms," Rose added simply. These moments validated every struggle endured, and they justified every sacrifice made. They confirmed every instinct followed, and our family hadn't followed traditional patterns. We had created something uniquely beautiful instead. I sometimes caught myself staring at old photographs, small girls with gap-toothed smiles, and teenagers with awkward expressions, young women with confident postures, and the progression seemed both gradual and sudden. The years had accumulated almost without notice, and now adult daughters called for advice occasionally. They shared professional triumphs and disappointments, and they discussed relationship complexities. They planned visits with enthusiastic detail, and they had become people I genuinely admired. They carried our family history without resentment, and they approached their futures with optimistic determination. They maintained connections that nurtured their spirits. I recognized parts of myself in their mannerisms. I heard echoes of Mark in their laughter. I noticed traces of Emma in their artistic sensibilities. I spotted my parents' influences in countless small ways. They had absorbed the best from everyone who loved them. Alice called one spring morning with unexpected news. She had met someone special, and she wanted us to meet him. Rose emailed later that same week, and she had accepted a teaching position nearby. She planned to move closer to home, and these developments sparked new possibilities. Family gatherings would happen more frequently, and grandchildren might appear eventually. New chapters awaited our continued story. I sat on the porch swing with Mark that evening. We watched the sunset paint familiar trees. "We did good," he said simply, squeezing my hand. I nodded without speaking. The journey from crisis to contentment stretched behind us. The path forward held promises of continued connection. The love that surrounded us had indeed been hard-won. It remained the greatest achievement of my life. As time passed, our lives settled into comfortable patterns. I woke early most mornings, brewing coffee before Mark stirred. The kitchen window framed the backyard garden I'd started last spring. Birds gathered at the feeder hanging from our oak tree. I sipped slowly, savoring moments of quiet before the day began. Mark appeared in worn flannel pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. His morning kiss tasted of toothpaste and familiar comfort. We developed little rituals without trying, and Sunday brunches became our weekly tradition. The local diner knew our order before we spoke. Mark always finished my hash browns when I couldn't. I started walking 3 miles daily along the river path. My doctor had suggested more exercise for my aging joints. The morning air filled my lungs with something like possibility. I collected smooth river stones that caught my eye. They piled on our windowsill, reminding me of simple beauty. Mark teased me about bringing nature indoors. I arranged them by color, creating an accidental rainbow. The neighbors invited us to their summer barbecue. I brought my potato salad that everyone requested. The recipe came from my grandmother, perfected over decades. Children raced through sprinklers while adults talked, and I watched families growing before my eyes. Time moved differently at gatherings like these. Mark chatted with the men about retirement plans. I overheard him mention our upcoming anniversary trip. 40 years together deserved more than just dinner out. We'd booked a cabin in the mountains for a week. The photos showed a wraparound porch with rocking chairs. I packed my favorite books and comfortable shoes. The drive took us through changing landscapes, and fields gave way to foothills, then forests. Mark played his old CDs from college days. I remembered dancing to these songs decades earlier. The cabin exceeded our expectations upon arrival, and windows framed mountain views from every room. The fireplace waited for cool evening temperatures. I unpacked while Mark brought in groceries. The kitchen had all we needed for simple meals. We walked hand in hand along nearby trails, and wildflowers dotted meadows in surprising colors. I collected a few for a small vase. Mark pointed out bird species I'd never noticed. His bird-watching hobby had grown serious lately. We spotted deer at dusk near our cabin. They moved with silent grace through dappled light. I took photos to show our daughter later. The night sky revealed stars hidden in city life. We lay on a blanket counting constellations, and Mark remembered more names than I expected. The week passed in a blur of small pleasures. We read books side by side on the porch. Mark finished 3 mysteries during our stay. I worked through a novel I'd been saving. We talked less than usual during these days. The comfort of silence marked our deep connection. Our return home brought welcome familiarity. The mail had piled up during our absence. Our daughter called to check on our trip. She mentioned visiting with the grandkids soon. I circled dates on the calendar with anticipation. The garden needed attention after a week away. Weeds had claimed territory between my tomatoes. I spent mornings pulling them under the warming sun. Mark fixed the loose railing on our back steps. His retirement had unleashed home improvement projects. The garage transformed into his workshop over time. Wood shavings covered the concrete floor constantly, and he crafted small toys for our grandchildren. Each birthday brought new handmade treasures from Grandpa. I baked cookies for their anticipated visit. The house filled with smells of chocolate and vanilla. Our daughter's car pulled into the driveway Thursday afternoon. Little faces pressed against windows with excitement, and the grandchildren tumbled out with endless energy. Hugs wrapped around my legs and waist immediately. Their overnight bags suggested a longer visit, and my heart filled with their chaotic presence. The refrigerator displayed new artwork within minutes, and our quiet home transformed with their arrival. I served dinosaur-shaped sandwiches for lunch, and stories poured from small mouths between bites. School adventures and playground politics dominated conversation, and Mark showed off his latest wooden creations. The children claimed them with possessive delight. We walked to the park after afternoon naps. The playground equipment had been recently updated. I pushed swings while Mark supervised the slides. Our daughter joined us after her work calls ended. The family resemblance struck me watching them together. Her gestures mirrored mine from decades earlier, and time collapsed in these multi-generation moments. We ordered pizza for dinner to everyone's approval. Bedtime stories stretched longer than planned, and little bodies finally surrendered to sleep. The adults talked quietly over glasses of wine. Our daughter shared news of a possible promotion. Her career had flourished beyond my early dreams. I felt pride seeing her confidence and capability. The morning brought pancakes shaped like animals, and sticky syrup hands required multiple washings. They left after lunch with promises to return. The house felt emptier, but warmly so. Evidence of their visit remained in small ways. A forgotten sock under the couch appeared later. Crayon drawings waited on the refrigerator door. Mark returned to his workshop with new ideas. I called my sister to share our weekend stories. She lived too far away for regular visits. Our weekly calls maintained our close connection, and she mentioned health concerns I noted carefully. Her doctor had scheduled tests for next month. I promised to visit if she needed support. Mark agreed without hesitation to potential travel, and family remained our shared priority always. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and changing leaves. I pulled sweaters from storage bins in the attic. The neighborhood trees created colorful canopies. I took photos on my morning walks regularly. The river reflected double beauty in still waters. Migrating birds gathered overhead some mornings, and Mark identified their formations with practiced eyes. We attended the community harvest festival downtown, and local vendors sold produce and handmade goods. I purchased honey from the same beekeeper annually. Mark found a hand-carved walking stick he admired. Music played from the central gazebo continuously. Neighbors greeted us as we browsed the stalls. We ran into friends we hadn't seen recently. Conversations picked up as if never paused, and community connections deepened with each passing year. We walked home with bags of apples and pumpkins. I planned pies and soups for upcoming weeks. Mark carried most items despite my protests, and his stubborn chivalry remained unchanged by time. Halloween approached with neighborhood preparations, and children would soon appear seeking candy treasures. I bought too much chocolate as always. Mark hung the fake spider web by our front door. We carved pumpkins the weekend before the holiday. My design featured traditional triangle features, and Mark created an elaborate haunted house scene. Trick-or-treaters arrived in creative costumes. Parents waited at the sidewalk with patient smiles. I complimented each outfit with genuine appreciation, and Mark distributed candy with theatrical flair. Our porch light stayed on until supplies diminished. November brought family Thanksgiving planning. Our daughter would host for the first time. I offered assistance without taking over. She had her own traditions to establish now. We drove across town with side dishes carefully packed. Their home welcomed us with warm scents, and other relatives arrived bearing additional food.